We're here with Mike Sylvester from Americans for Prosperity. You're a senior trainer in the organization, and you just gave a great talk, very enlightening talk.
Thank you.
We're here at the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, and I just want to ask you could you kind of just summarize some of you were talking about moral foundations theory.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
very interesting. What's that about?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that we advocate just as an organization, especially at Americans for Prosperity, is to figure out ways to build common ground with people. And one of those ways that we can figure out how to build common ground is understanding what's known as the moral foundations theory. It's written by a behavioral psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. And basically what he found is that there are 6 moral foundations for which people guide their beliefs. And so understanding these moral foundations inside and out is a great way to figure out how you can effectively communicate with individuals and understand where they are at from their perspective. And so there's about 6 different foundations. There's fairness, there's caring, there's loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty. And one of the fascinating parts about this test is you can actually take it online and you self-report whether you're liberal, conservative, or libertarian. And the results of this, there's been thousands of people who have taken this test, is they found that the people who are more on the liberal side of the aisle overwhelmingly are part of the fairness and caring moral foundations, whereas conservatives have a more rounded sense of moral foundations where fairness and caring are in there. But then there's also loyalty, authority, sanctity, liberty, which are also huge priorities. And so a big reason why we see these two oblivious ships almost in political discourse is because oftentimes you'll see someone from the liberal side of the aisle approaching it from a fairness perspective, but then a conservative approaching it from maybe more of an authority perspective or a loyalty perspective. And so it's fascinating to see how this theory plays out in life and how it drives a lot of our discussions.
Yeah, so I think, conservatives, we do have a challenge. I consider myself a conservative, but I think we do have a challenge to communicating with a lot of people because, like you were saying, I like to talk about facts, figures, statistics, right? Mm-hmm. And that does not always work. Mm-hmm. So how do you approach? Based on what you said, how do you make is it an economic argument, or? Mm-hmm. But you said there's a moral. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a moral side to economics, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So there's the thing that we always need to consider when we're talking with individuals is where's their mind at from that moral perspective that you were talking about? Because when we think about, for example, tax reform, you think about tax reform and you hear that phrase all the time, the wealthy need to pay their fair share. The wealthy need to pay their fair share. And I'm sure your instinct is to say, well, statistically speaking, the wealthy do pay their fair share. But the problem is you've accepted the premise that they've set. And so because of that, they can guide that discussion wherever they want. And so even if you think that statistically speaking, they pay their fair share, they can say, no, actually, they need to pay more. And as a result of that, they can guide and lead the discussion in a way that's not productive. And so what we challenge people to do is to think about how you can address that premise in the first place so that you can have a more productive conversation. And so as a result of that, what we typically like to push back on is when we think about taxes in general, in a lot of cases, they're taking away money from people who have earned it. I think about my mom, and she used to work 80 hours a week, and then when she was done, she would get taxed over 50% by the government just being in Canada and for her income bracket. And it's inherently unfair that she would work 80 hours a week, do nothing but work, and then someone else would come in and take 55% of what she had earned. And the thing that we always need to look at is how can we reframe the discussion so that from a moral perspective they can better understand where we're coming from.
Right. That's great. Now, how do you deal with international issues?
A little bit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because, there is there's the ideology coming out of Europe quite a bit that they seem to believe more in centralized, top-down control. And, of course, there are advocates of that approach here in America, too. How do you deal with that challenge?
Yeah, so really that's a great question because we're seeing a growth of that. We're seeing a growth in.
Censorship.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that top-down approach where they try to censor different beliefs and basically try to dictate how everyone should live their lives. And Ronald Reagan was such a great communicator on this front in helping people understand the importance of the individual. And one of the things that I always loved him saying is that people know how to run their lives better than some bureaucrat out in Washington, D.C. And I think it's important for us to really emphasize not just the importance for individuals to be able to be in control of their lives, but also, along with that, be able to advocate from that perspective of how much better life is when people are able to have those types of bottom-up type lifestyles. Because we've seen so much great entrepreneurship, so much great success when people are free to do what they want to do. And despite people trying to control things, a lot of our best progress that we've made has been from that bottom-up perspective as opposed from that top-down perspective.
Now, I imagine there may be some things that you like about President Trump's initiatives. Maybe there's some things that you don't like. I'm curious if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So I think one of the best things he did from a bottom-up solution to allow for people to keep their hard-earned money was that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back in 2017. It was a great step forward in allowing for people to keep more money and be able to spend it on their family, on themselves, and to be able to operate their businesses more effectively. And really, when you think about it, it was a great accomplishment. And there's a lot of different things that the administration has done that they did from 2016 to 2020 that we can look back on and be very proud of. I mean, you think about it from a foreign policy perspective, there were no new wars under the Trump administration. He did a very good job at managing various relationships with the countries around the world. And as a result of that, we didn't see ourselves getting into endless wars or conflicts that were problematic. And so he deserves a lot of credit for things that he's done, like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that allowed for some solid economic prosperity within its passing. And the fact that he's been able to keep us out of some really heavy conflicts. I mean, you think about it, the moment he left, you had the Ukraine conflict pop up within about a year. And you have to wonder, if he was leader then, would that have ever happened? And you always have to wonder. You don't truly know the answer, but he did a great job, and he continues to do a great job at making sure that we stay out of those endless wars and continue to put our country first.
Also, in the Middle East, I'm skeptical that would have happened. You never can be sure. But, they perceived America to be weak. When the cat's away, the mouse will play.
Yeah, it's true. It's we see it a lot from a foreign policy perspective, and you think about how much tensions escalated between Gaza and Israel, but you think about what that dynamic was when he was president. He did a lot of things to make sure that the tension was at a low during that time. I mean, they signed the Abraham Accords. They did a lot of different things to really move the needle forward in terms of those relationships. And then, like you said, once they sensed weakness in that, the conflict just completely escalated out of control.
All right, well, listen, tell us more about the Americans for Prosperity and how people can find out more about it.
Absolutely. I would love to talk about it. So Americans for Prosperity, we're a grassroots organization, and basically what we want to help people do is advocate for causes that help us reignite the American dream. We see a country in a lot of ways devoid of hope, and we want to be able to provide that beacon of hope that allows for people to keep more of their hard-earned money through tax cuts and jobs acts and stuff like that. We want to be able to make sure that people aren't fighting in endless wars so that there's continual suffering. And we want to encourage people to get involved in the political process so that they can talk to their representatives at the state, local, and federal level and let them know that we want a society that is bottom up. We want a society that enables people to live their best life. And we want to be able to have the best amount of prosperity possible so that people can live the American dream. And that's what our organization strives to do every day. Yeah, so you can visit americansforprosperity.org to get involved and learn how you can continue that fight for freedom within our country.